Dear students, welcome to Study and Learn Academy. I am Dr. Ganpat Nagda. Today we will start a general topic, important judgments of independent India, that is related to law. The Constitution of India, enacted in 1950, has been the cornerstone of India's democracy. After its enactment, it has undergone several amendments. The Supreme Court is the ultimate interpreter of the Constitution, and by its creative and innovative interpretation has been the protector of our Constitution and fundamental freedoms. These judgments are to be appreciated not only as precedents but also as having laid down the law on issues of paramount importance, law that is binding on. First, Keshwananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, 1973. Main theme: propagating the basic structure doctrine as a safeguard against the usurpation of the Constitution. It was unique for the reason that it brought a shift in the balance of democratic power. Earlier judgments had taken a stand with that Parliament could amend even the fundamental rights through a proper legislative process. But the present case held that Parliament cannot amend and or alter the fundamental structure, a basic structure of the Constitution. Besides, Keshwanand case was significant in that the Supreme Court ascribed to itself the function of preserving the integrity of the Indian Constitution. The basic structure doctrine formulated by the court represented the pinnacle of judicial creativity and set a benchmark for other constitutional courts around the world. The doctrine ruled that even a constitutional amendment could be individuated if it impaired the essential features, the basic structure of the Constitution. Evolution of the basic structure doctrine. Since the adoption of Indian Constitution, debates have started regarding the power of the Parliament to amend key provisions of the Constitution. In the early years of independence, the Supreme Court conceded absolute power to Parliament in amending the Constitution, as was seen in the verdicts in Shankari Prasad case 1951 and Sajjan Singh case 1965. This means Parliament had the power to amend any part of the Constitution, including fundamental rights. However, in the Golaknath case 1967, the Supreme Court held that Parliament could not amend fundamental rights, and this power would be only with a constituent assembly. The court held that an amendment under this Article 368 is law within the meaning of Article 13 of the Constitution, and therefore, if an amendment takes away or abridges a fundamental right conferred by Part 3, it is void. To get over the judgments of the Supreme Court in the Golaknath case 1967, R.C. Kapoor case 1970 and Madara Scindia case 1970, then government decided by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had enacted major amendments to the Constitution, 24th, 25th, 26th and 29th. All the four amendments brought by the government were challenged in the Keshwananda Bharati case. Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India, 1978. Main theme: expanding the meaning of the right to life under the Constitution of India. The right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 reads, no person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. In other words, courts were not allowed to question any law. no matter how arbitrary or oppressive, as violating the right to life or personal liberty if the law had been suitably passed and enacted. However, by vesting in itself the power of substantive review under Article 21, the court transformed itself from being merely a supervisor to being a watchdog of the Constitution. The Supreme Court judgment in the Maneka Gandhi case effectively meant that procedure established by law under Article 21 would have the same effect as an expression due process of law. In a subsequent decision, the Supreme Court stated that Article 21 would read as, "No person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to fair, just and reasonable procedure established by the valid law." Muhammad Ahmad Khan versus Shah Bano Begum, 1985. Main theme of the case: questioning this sensitivity of personal religious law and bringing the debate on a uniform civil code to the forefront of the national discourse. In April 1985, the Supreme Court delivered a judgment on the maintenance a divorced Muslim woman would be entitled to receive from her former husband in the case of Muhammad Ahmad Khan versus Shah Bano Begum. It is seen as one of the milestones in Muslim women's fight the right and the battle against this set Muslim personal law. It laid the ground for the thousands of women to make legitimate claims which they were not allowed before. While the Supreme Court upheld the right to alimony in the case, the judgment set off a political battle as well. As Indira Sawhney versus Union of India, 1992. The main theme of the case: delivering the decision relating to the constitutionality of reservations under the Constitution of India. In the Indira Sawhney case judgment 1992, the court upheld the government's move and proclaimed that the advanced sections among the OBCs, the creamy layer, must be excluded from the list of beneficiaries of reservation. It also held that the concept of creamy layer must be excluded for SCs and STs. The Indira Sawhney verdict also held there would be reservation only in initial appointments and not promotions. But through this amendments introduced Article 16(4)(a) to the Constitution, empowering the state to make provisions for reservation in matters of promotion to SC/STs employees if the state feels they are not adequately represented. The Supreme Court in the judgment also kept the reservation quota at 50%. Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan, 1997. Main theme of the case is innovating jurisprudence to prevent sexual harassment at the workplace. In the context of sexual harassment of women at workplace, judicial activism reached its pinnacle in Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan. The judgment was unprecedented for several reasons. The Supreme Court acknowledged and relied to a great extent on international treaties that had not been transformed into municipal law. The Supreme Court provided the first authority definition of sexual harassment in India and confronted with a statutory vacuum. It went creative and proposed the route of judicial legislation. Since there was no legislation in India related to sexual harassment at the workplace, the court stated that it was free to rely on the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, signed by India in 1980, in interpreting Articles 14, 15, 19 and 215 of the Constitution. To justify on the court referred to several sources including the Beijing Statement of Principles of the independence of the judiciary, a decision of the High Court of Australia, and its own earlier decisions. The Supreme Court set out the following significant guidelines. The employer and or other responsible people in workplace are duty bound to prevent or deter sexual harassment and set up processes to resolve, settle or prosecute in such cases. For the first time in India, sexual harassment was defined authoritatively. The definition includes such unwelcome sexually determined behavior, whether directly or by implication, such as physical contact and advances, a demand or request for sexual favors, sexually colored remarks, showing geographically, and any other unwelcome physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of sexual nature. All employers of persons in charge of workplaces must strive to prevent sexual harassment, and if any act amounts for a specific offence under the Indian Penal Code 1860 or any other law, they must take appropriate actions to punish the guilty. Even if the act is not considered a legal offence of a breach of service rules, the employer should create appropriate mechanism so that the complaint is addressed and readdressed in a time-bound manner. This complaint mechanism must, if necessary, provide a complementary committee, a special counselor or other support service, such as assuring confidentiality. The complaints committee should be headed by a woman, and at least half its members must be women. The employer must sensitize female employees to their rights and prominently notify the court's guidelines. Even if a third party is responsible for sexual harassment, the employer must take all steps necessary to support the victims. Central and state government should adopt suitable measures to ensure that private sector employers implement the guidelines. Aruna Ramchandra Shanbhog versus Union of India 2011. The main theme of the case is accepting passive euthanasia as being constitutional. Passive euthanasia is a condition where there is a withdrawal of medical treatment with the deliberate intention to hasten the death of a terminally ill patient. The Aruna Shahbag case triggered debate of euthanasia in India. A writ petition under Article 32 before the Supreme Court of India was filed, asking for the legislation of euthanasia so that Aruna's continued suffering could be terminated by withdrawing medical support. Supreme Court in 2011 recognized passive euthanasia in this case, by which it had permitted withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment from patients not in a position to make an informed decision. Subsequent to this, in a landmark judgment 2018, the Supreme Court recognized passive euthanasia and living will. A living will is a concept where a patient can give consent that allows withdrawal of life support systems if the individual is reduced to a permanent vegetative state with no real chance of survival. Lily Thomas versus Union of India 2013. Main theme: struck down as unconstitutional section 8(4) of the Representation of the People Act 1951 that allowed convicted landmark a 3-month period for the filing appeals to the higher courts and to get a stay on the conviction and sentence. Section 8 of the RPA deals with disqualification on conviction for certain offences. A person convicted of any offence and sentenced to imprisonment for verifying terms under Section 8(1), 2 and 3 shall be disqualified from the date of conviction and shall continue to be disqualified for a further period of 6 years since its release. But Section 8(4) of the RP Act gives protection to MPs and MLAs as they can continue in office even after conviction if an appeal is filed within 3 months. The Supreme Court held that charge-sheeted members of Parliament and MLAs on conviction for offences will be immediately disqualified from holding membership of the House without being given 3 months' time for appeal, as was the case before. The bench found it unconstitutional that convicted persons could be disqualified but could continue to be members of Parliament and state legislature once elected. So this is all about the important acts. Thank you very much. Goodbye.